Welcome to this explainer. Okay, let's just dive right into a universal struggle we all face. You know that overwhelming to-do list and that sudden, intense, almost undeniable urge to go, I don't know, reorganize your reference library or literally scrub your entire kitchen instead of actually doing your work? Yeah, we've all been there. You're drowning in options, and prioritizing just feels completely impossible. But today, we're decoding a surprisingly simple, yet scientifically backed strategy to cut through all that noise and totally transform your productivity.
To solve this whole modern crisis of attention, we're going to look at the kind of bizarre concept of eating a live frog. Now, don't panic. It is just a metaphor. In this context, your frog is simply the single biggest task on your plate right now, the one that's going to have the absolute greatest positive impact on your results. And consequentially, it's the exact same one you're actively avoiding right now.
This entire framework actually comes from a famous quote, usually attributed to Mark Twain. It goes, "If it's your job to eat a frog, it's best to do it first thing in the morning." This perfectly captures our core philosophy today. Basically, if you tackle your absolute most anxiety-inducing, difficult task first thing, well, the rest of your day is a total breeze, right? Because you know the absolute worst is already behind you. So, here is how we'll break this down today. First, we'll meet your ugliest frog. 2, the man behind the method. 3, the science of frog eating. 4, systems versus motivation. And finally, 5, how to eat your frog.
Let's jump straight into section 1. Meet your ugliest frog. Why you can never get caught up. Look, the hard truth about our modern world is that you are just drowning in options. And honestly, you will never, ever be fully caught up. There's just too much to do. Getting comfortable with that reality is step 1. Step 2 is figuring out what actually matters. So, what does a frog actually look like in the wild? Well, as you can see here, it's definitely not just firing off a quick email. It's that high-value, complex stuff that demands some really heavy cognitive lifting. Usually it's pretty ambiguous, too. Think about analyzing a messy data set or trying to draft a really tough report from scratch. Because it lacks a clear structure, it creates this massive psychological resistance, which makes you anxious. And what do we do when we're anxious? We postpone it, over and over and over again.
Now, this brilliantly illustrates the 2 cardinal rules for dealing with these massive tasks. Rule number 1, if you have 2 frogs, like 2 massive, incredibly ugly tasks, you absolutely must eat the ugliest one first. Don't try to start with the easier one just to build momentum. No way. Go straight for the hardest one. And rule number 2, if you have to eat a live frog at all, it really doesn't pay to sit around staring at it for very long. Seriously, the longer you stare at that daunting task, the bigger that psychological barrier gets. Moving right along to section 2, the man behind the method, from tramp freighter to CEO. So you might be wondering, who actually came up with this super tactical, no-nonsense approach to productivity? Let's take a look at the guy behind the metaphor.
Check out that staggering number, $265 million. That is the value of Brian Tracy International. But Brian Tracy started out with very few advantages in life. He didn't even finish college, he worked grueling manual labor jobs, and even spent time working on a tramp freighter traveling the world. When he finally got into straight commission sales, he struggled big time. But his turning point? He just started asking successful people what they did differently, and he literally copied them until he built a $265 million empire as CEO. How crazy is that?
Tracy published his international bestseller, Eat That Frog, back in 2001, totally cementing his authority on the subject. Since then, he's spoken to over 5 million people and authored more than 70 books. What Tracy realized was that successful people don't necessarily work more hours than the rest of us. They just have a fierce action orientation. They isolate the single most important thing, and they flat out refuse to be distracted until it is completely done. All right, let's dive into section 3, the science of frog eating, why this actually works neurologically. Sometimes self-help and productivity advice can sound like a lot of motivational fluff, right? So let's move beyond the whole frog metaphor for a second and look at the actual hard cognitive psychology that proves why this method is undeniably effective. The reality is our brains literally run out of fuel. As you can see in this breakdown, researchers like Roy Baumeister talk about ego depletion. This means your willpower is at its absolute highest in the morning, and it fatigues just like a muscle as the day drags on. Pair that with decision fatigue, where literally every single choice you make drains you a little bit more. If you wait until 4 p.m. to eat your frog, you're just not going to have the mental energy for it. And it gets worse. Leaving that massive task untouched actually triggers the Zygarnik effect. This is where uncompleted tasks take up background processing power in your brain, literally causing stress and draining your energy before you even start working.
But here is the biological flip side, and it's a game changer. Completing difficult tasks actually releases endorphins and dopamine. When you tackle your hardest task first thing in the morning, you get this incredible rush of neurochemicals that makes you feel confident, creative, and just plain powerful. Tracy points out that you can actually develop a positive addiction to this feeling of success, which acts like rocket fuel for your productivity and focus for the rest of the day.
Which brings us to section 4, systems versus motivation. Where does the frog fit? Now, you might be sitting there wondering how this whole frog thing fits in with massive productivity frameworks you might already be using, like David Allen's Getting Things Done, or GTD. Are they totally contradictory? Let's clear that up.
Despite a ton of vibrant community debate among productivity nerds, these systems are absolutely not mutually exclusive. As you can see here, GTD is your overarching system. It's the architecture for how you organize your inbox, your projects, your schedule, so nothing falls through the cracks. But when it comes down to actually sitting at your desk and deciding what to do right this very second out of that perfectly organized list, GTD can kind of leave you paralyzed with choices. And that is exactly where Eat That Frog steps in. It's your specific, pinpoint tactic to conquer motivation issues and pick the highest impact action right now.
I do need to give you a quick warning, though. Do not mistake a noisy task for a frog. Urgent tasks are things like, say, an immediate frantic email from a colleague or a ringing phone. They scream for your attention, sure, but they very rarely advance your long-term goals. Your frog is your highest priority, high-value task. And honestly, sometimes eating the frog means intentionally letting a few urgent but ultimately unimportant fires burn for an hour while you get the real work done. Okay, final section. Section 5, how to eat your frog, your actionable playbook. We know what a frog is, we know the science behind it, and we know exactly how it fits into our daily workflow. So let's bring it all together into a playbook you can actually use tomorrow morning. Following these 4 steps is absolutely essential. Step 1, identify your frog the night before. This creates what psychologists call an implementation intention, which heavily increases your chance of actually following through. Step 2, set up your physical space and turn off all those pesky notifications. Step 3, launch in immediately before doing any admin work whatsoever. And step 4, honestly, this is my absolute favorite. If you are facing massive resistance, just commit to working on the task for 15 minutes. Set a timer. Usually the psychological burden of just starting is the hardest part. Once you pass that 15-minute mark, momentum almost always takes over. Now, if you look at your task and think, there is literally no way I can do this in one sitting, it's way too big, well, then you haven't defined your frog properly. You need to slice and dice that massive frog into smaller, manageable chunks, or as I like to call them, froglets. So don't put write my dissertation on your list. That's terrifying. Put draft the first 3 paragraphs of the methodology section. Make it so hyper-specific that you can actually sit down and start chewing. To wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final thought, something you can act on right this second. Take a look at your to-do list. What is the single, ugliest, most anxiety-inducing yet highest value frog that you need to eat tomorrow morning? Seriously, identify it right now. Set your intention today, and tomorrow, before you even think about checking a single email, eat that frog.